So I wanted to make sure that I scripted this video more so than I would a normal video because I think that this topic is very involved and I wanted to make sure that I expressed myself in as a coherent way as possible. As a black man complaining about white leftists, it's that's like essentially the wet dream of the right. And as a former black conservative, I can say with certainty that just by me titling this video "White Leftism" is going to that's definitely going to draw in a lot of conservatives who are like basically salivating at the idea that I'm about to go in a whole spiel about how secretly it's the white liberals and the white leftists who are the real racists. That's not true, of course, and that's certainly not what's going to happen in this video. This video is not to bash anyone or any type of group of people type of person. This video is to do just the opposite, actually, and it's to promote leftism and to promote values in a way that is going to be beneficial to actually spreading that message to people who aren't currently leftists, who aren't currently progressives. And I think that we need to have a real conversation, particularly about some things that I've noticed as a member of both the breadtube community per se, or as the leftist community. I have noticed, I have seen, and I think there's a situation that really needs to be addressed. So basically, I think that the online leftist political discourse has a really big race problem. And essentially, I think that far too much of political discourse that's happening on BreadTube or online and the various different spaces where it can exist are pretty much entirely dominated by white people, in particular white men. I mean, I want you to just off the top of your head, just think of the top 10 biggest and most popular or most influential, whatever you want to say, leftist commentators that are on the internet. Of course there are some niche ones that are more diverse. I have a pretty small channel and I'm a diverse BreadTube creator, but think of 10 BreadTube creators just in general. There's a huge chance that practically all of them are going to be white people, with the exception for with maybe like Cat Black or like someone like that. Pretty much all of the content creators on LeftTube, whether various different either they're in the 100,000 sub mark or they're over 1 million subs, they're all white people, particularly white men. Now you may wonder, well, Jordan, why is that a problem? Why does it matter that a lot of leftist political commentators are white men? After all, isn't leftism and being a progressive all about dialectics? Is all about figuring out truth from opinions, and if something is true and something is good, it should be able to be promoted by whoever, regardless of the demographics. We don't want to engage in the same identity politics as the liberals do. I can imagine that could be one reaction to me talking about this. Well, for one, you shouldn't use the term. You should not use the term identity politics. That's a conservative term and is extremely redundant. It's impossible to remove your identity from your political actions and your political decisions. Anyone who is saying that they engage in politics without they try to pretend as though they're like a rational actor, those types of people are the most biased usually, because they're completely unaware of their biases. They have completely no self-awareness about that type of stuff. So that's number one. Number two, no, I do actually honestly think it does matter about who discusses, or rather like what type of person per se discusses certain information. And this is practically why. Don't get me wrong. I think, white leftists talking about issues that affect primarily POC in a public forum is still going to end up being better than, let's say, like a black conservative like Candace Owens talking about these certain things. But what I really want white leftists and, and white progressives to understand and to realize is that after a certain point, there's going to be this sort of expectation of authority regarding what your opinions have. And it really gets put into perspective where it's just like, exactly why is this particular person's opinion on a topic, why is that actually valid? Why do we need this person to talk about it? Like, I'm super glad that in the community we have people like ContraPoints who, she comes from a particular background, but yet she's still able to really talk about like a wide variety of issues. She's able to engage with a huge audience, and she's able to do that while also simultaneously understanding, if she would talk about like an issue, like Black Lives Matter, she would understand that, yes, she can read all the, Ta-Nehisi Coates or whatever that she wants, but at the end of the day, she's never going to necessarily fully understand the Black experience. She's never going to fully understand what it's like to be a Black person in America. And likewise, myself, I can read all the gender theory that I want. I can read, I can watch, all of ContraPoint's content. But I'm never going to fully understand the struggles of a trans woman in America. Because at the end of the day, I am not a trans woman. And all the information that I know about that demographic's experience, the issues that come from that demographic, that comes from members of that demographic. That's where the authority comes from. I know that being trans is difficult in this world because I have trans people who talk about their experiences in the country and living within this within a society as a trans person. Now, let's compare that situation to, like, I don't know, let's say Vosh and Destiny arguing back and forth on when it's okay for Destiny to use the N-word. Where exactly does the ability to discern the truth in either side come from? How, no matter what Vosh's arguments are for why or why not Destiny should use the N-word, where does his authority come from in this topic? At the end of the day, it's one white person's opinion against another white person's opinion. Exactly how could you even expect there to be some sort of conclusion or understanding when both of the participating people in this are basically arguing on behalf of another demographic or another group of people? It's almost the equivalent of like arguing back and forth with a friend about if a mutual friend would be upset if, to find out that their significant other is cheating on them. Both friends can come up with all sorts of things and be like, oh, well, he's like this or he's like that. But until you actually ask that friend, until you actually confirm with that third party what their opinions towards the thing, what exactly good is it going to do to discuss these sorts of things? That's like, more or less a rhetorical question. Well, I'll tell you one bad thing it does. One bad thing is that it, once again, puts this white person, whoever this commentator is, as the authority figure. And now you have these instances where, I watch some of some people's streams, and they're asking these white commentators, they're asking these white content creators questions about, do you think so-and-so is racist? Do you think so-and-so is like, do you think this thing is harmful for Black people? Do you think Black people would be more likely to be more left-leaning candidates if we do this? What exactly, after a certain point, what good does it serve to not discuss these things with the people in the demographics that need to be discussed with? Exactly at what point are you going to have that self-awareness to be like, maybe I shouldn't ask Hassan this question. Maybe I shouldn't ask Lance from the Surfs this question about white nationalism. Because at the end of the day, that person isn't going to be, as heavily affected by white. I'm not going to say not at all affected, but they're not going to be as heavily affected by white nationalism as a Black person would. And by the way, really quickly, since we're on this topic, and unfortunately my camera battery is dying, I'm going to also really quickly talk about white leftism, which I really want to point out is different from just talking about white leftists per se. I'm going to just say this once and clearly. Understanding how intersectionality works is far more important than understanding the tenets of Marxism. And essentially, if you don't know what the hell that sentence means, basically I want you to know that understanding that, the material conditions of people living in a society influences history, and understanding that the labor theory of value and all that, all the nice tenets and educational things that we get from reading Marx and Engels and stuff like that, all of that stuff is great. However, if you're unable as a leftist, as a person, to understand why, like in a more practical sense, that Joe Biden is better than, let's say, Donald Trump, and the reason why people are voting for Joe Biden, and with record enthusiasm, at least in terms of voting turnout goes, is because they recognize the threat of that Donald Trump holds. How can you call yourself a leftist, and how can you be that well read, and yet you seemingly can't differentiate between liberalism and fascism as someone who's supposed to be well read? And this isn't exclusive to white leftists, but undoubtedly you see a lot of the shaming, at least initially. I think now most people have changed their tune because they realize how, our backs are going, to the fucking wall with this election. But before, right around the time that Bernie had first lost the election, you saw a lot of people shaming others, calling other leftists liberals because they wanted to vote for Biden. And most of them were like white, college educated people on the internet. Speaking of Joe Biden really fast, let's talk about why he won the nomination. Because if you remember, Bernie tied with Pete Buttigieg in Iowa, and then he won the other two states, i.e. New Hampshire and Nevada, right? But it was South Carolina. It was the state that had a huge proportion of black voters in it. That was the thing that ultimately that vote decided a lot of the rest of the nomination process. And it was black voters who overwhelmingly, and all jokes aside, Joe Biden won 3/5 of the black vote. That's whose fault is that? Whose fault is it that black people overwhelmingly were more confident with Joe Biden than Bernie Sanders? Is it the fault of those people for not knowing any better? Or maybe it's the fault of us. Maybe it's the fault of us as progressives for not going into these communities and putting in the same amount of work that the liberals did for that, and that they have been doing for decades, to connect with people in these communities and to gain their trust. And so that, we have to learn as leftists to campaign. And part of that is, not sending in these people who look like they're, fresh off of Reddit, who look like that they don't look like the people who live in these communities, That's practically, everything I have to say about that. I just want, because I see all this talk about revolution and proletariat, revolution and stuff. We're going to need a lot more in terms of reaching out to all types of people than just putting memes on Facebook or on TikTok and on Reddit. We need to learn how to, funny enough, we have to learn how to sell leftism to people. And we have to, really, really need to reach out to these communities. Because what happens is that these communities go to other far-right things. Obviously, they're not, poor black people living in Philly aren't going to become Proud Boys, but they are going to, maybe become Black Hebrew Israelites, or start listening to the NFAC certain rhetoric about black nationalism and stuff, and start believing in a whole bunch of other stupid shit that has nothing to do with the liberation of black people. We need to do better as a community, and we need to be more diverse in the voices that we allow to have discussions on certain things. And we need to also stop, as a leftist, your job should be to promote the voices of the marginalized, not to represent them on their behalf. And I'm going to say that again, because if there's anything I want you to take from this video, from watching it, even if you dislike my take, whatever, I want it to be that. As a leftist, your job is to promote the voices of the marginalized, not to represent them on their behalves. Trust me, black people can say some brilliant things about racism. Black people can say have some brilliant takes about white nationalism. And there might be takes that certain people growing up in certain cultural backgrounds aren't familiar with. And, TLDR, the next time you have to talk about an issue that involves black people or involves people of color, you might consider asking a black person or a person of color about their opinion.